Where do we start?
What
Why am
was there before we started?
why am I nervous about
What's check?
oh why am I nervous about speaking too directly about dialogos?
What's changed since we last all met?
What's the same since we last all met?
What makes us nervous?
Is nervousness a spectrum with a positive and negative aspect to it?
Is
What are
anything
feelings good for?
I'm sorry, could you repeat? I didn't hear that.
What are feelings good for?
What are feelings good for, as in what is the point of them?
Hmm. Various interpretations could be.
what would it be like to have a sort of policy of always following that feeling of nervousness or uncertainty or sort of that internal kind of butterflies in your stomach, to always turn towards that?
Hmm.
What would that existence be like?
So would that be something, instead of following your bliss, follow your discomfort?
Follow your, oh, no question there. So,
Hmm.
How much anxiety can we handle?
right. And what does it mean to not be able, what would it mean to take on more anxiety than you could handle? What does it mean to not handle it?
Does experiencing anxiety on a regular basis make you more sensitive to anxiety inducing things or more resilient to them?
Is there utility to the metaphor of having like a fuel gauge for energy that you would deplete on experiencing more anxiety, Or are we just
Where
being
does this,
or are we just being pussies when we say, "Oh, I've had enough, I'm gonna relax."
where does discernment fit in?
Where is what?
Discernment.
Hmm.
Yeah, and how does one discern between actual anxiety generated by the prospect of the thing that we're going to be versus the sort of background anxiety of, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I'm not that kind of thing, situational anxiety versus generalized psychological background anxiety. How do we distinguish between those? Is there a distinction between those?
How
And if there is, can we can we learn to self-regulate in the face of genuinely anxiety causing situations?
could you ever level up your ability to handle anxiety to such a degree that you would never then face anxiety again? Or is it more of a infinite ladder? Hmm.
Is is the
Hmm.
is anxiety or is the key to eliminating anxiety linked to overcoming the fear of death?
Could you ask that again, please?
Is the key to overcoming anxiety linked to eliminating the fear of death?
is anxiety, does anxiety serve us? Does it serve us to be anxious about anything ever?
What would life be like to be completely not anxious ever? Sort of a reframing.
What is the
Do other
purpose of anxiety?
and do other animals experience anxiety as opposed to fear or trepidation? But do animals sit in their burrows being anxious about the outside world?
Does anxiety require a mental conception of the past or the future?
Hmm.
Are there maybe multiple definitions of anxiety floating around? It's almost a statement disguised as a question there. Sorry about that. I guess
Our fear of death, is there a relationship between fear of death or lack thereof and like trust or faith in something, uh, existence or
is it, if
Is
we
faith the opposite of anxiety? Oh, sorry.
no, go ahead. Well, yeah, is faith the opposite of anxiety? Right. And I was going to ask sort of a similar direction, which is if we imagine sort of the ideal, um, the person ideally capable of dealing with anxiety, is it easier to imagine that person as very religious or agnostic or atheist? Yeah, and I guess to sort of come back to
what
what
is
you
it?
said, Eric, does can is faith required to almost address anxiety at a fundamental level?
If we didn't pass through the river of forgetfulness and, and forget our previous life, would we be anxious in this one, knowing reincarnation to be real?
Would that be a cheat code?
Would death even mean anything anymore if you popped out into another baby, started walking around, programming, whatever? All right. So, suppose we can move on to things other than questions now. Um, Josh, do you want to start with saying anything that stood out to you? Themes or questions or anything? Thoughts?
Yeah, obviously, toward as it progressed, it seemed like we were weaving in it was kind of like anxiety. The themes were anxiety, a fear of death, and like faith or and yeah, the relationship between those things.
Hmm. Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. Anxiety was the main theme, and the only thing I would add to what Josh said, agree with all of that. The only thing I would add to what Josh said is maybe like how might we remedy the experience of anxiety? How might we alleviate the experience of anxiety? Was the other sort of theme that emerged for me.
Hmm. Magnus?
Um, there's an aspect of anxiety that is quite stimulating and focusing, and I I wonder if it. Yeah, I wonder if it's right to try and want to eliminate it or to more play with it as something that can help bring us into the present moment and focus us.
Yeah. Yeah, I also I found it hard to force it into any kind of question, but especially in the beginning of when we started talking about anxiety, I was really noticing a feeling of joy almost, like how it seems like anxiety is almost next to joy or excitement. And I suppose I touched on it when I asked about like following anxiety, but and then for me, I guess top of mind is also dialogos and how it seems like bravely diving into that anxiety is the way that I kind of break through into higher level conversations, generally speaking. And that seems to almost always be associated with anxiety.
Hmm.
And just to add to that, I maybe just coming to my mind that anxiety might well be key to getting into flow states.
Hmm.
Hmm. Okay, so what's coming up for me, and Logan brought this up about different definitions of anxiety, and this is becoming very evident to me in this early part of the discussion. So it might be worth spending a few minutes on talking about that, because it seems to me that the anxiety that you, Logan, certainly, and to a certain degree, Magnus, are pointing at is nervousness, excitement, that kind of thing, like anticipation, even, that kind of feeling. And anxiety for me does the exact opposite of bring you into the present moment, right? Anxiety takes you out of the present moment because you're imagining some unfavorable outcome in the future, right? Like, so anxiety is all about bad things that might happen. As far, when I use the word, right, it's that sense of something bad might happen, whether it is focused on a particular possibility or particular event or not, but just that feeling of not wanting a thing that might happen to happen, and so yeah, so I think we're using the word a little bit differently, and I think that's worth exploring. Yeah, go on, Magnus.
I just to clarify, is that because you think there are literally different, you're talking about different things and there's poor use of language, or maybe it's like a spectrum where the anxiety dial is turned up and just the low end there's a little bit of excitement and it can just help tip you into a more being in the present moment and perhaps a flow state, and the far end literally you're almost like panic attack and shaking in the moment, and it's a spectrum rather than completely different things.
Mm.
I keep thinking of performers talking about like stage butterflies and learning to basically sort of leverage or just it's like a familiar friend kind of thing. Like it still happens, but especially with repetition, you just get to know that you you're good at what you're doing and you're gonna do it. And it's just it, to me, and we could like look up what's the in the DSM or whatever, what's the official, but for me anxiety tracks more with kind of a long-term longer term, kind of what Erik was saying, just ruminating, thinking about things that could happen versus things that are more like immediate and acute, like going up on stage or being faced with some uh, immediate sort of dangerous thing.
It seems to me that there's
Yes,
oh
sorry.
um I guess I'll just be quick. I think that on one hand, Erik is pointing to like there's two different senses of the word. One is sort of the butterflies in your stomach feeling and that sort of present experience. And then there's the other thing, which is more very much future oriented and taking you out of the moment. But I think there's a connection there, which is that even in the feeling, there is an orientation towards the future and a positive, a possibly negative outcome. Like I'm only feeling anxious if there's some part of me that's worried about what's about to happen. I'm only feeling anxious about opening up because I'm worried that I'm going to expose myself and be hurt. Um, so I think that there's a continuity there, and yet those terms are sort of far enough apart that the distinction is worth being mindful of as well.
I was just going to say, and maybe it's the same what you said, Logan, in a slightly different way, but it's almost like being stuck in that looping mind, plus anxiety turned up pretty high. We get to somewhere that Erik's talking about, but perhaps being more in the present moment and that anxiety at only about 5% just giving you a sharpness, that produces something that's more positive and beneficial.
So I'd like to point to a distinction which I'm noticing here. So there's two things that we can be fearful of, if I may use the word fearful or anxious of. One is not knowing what is going to be happening in the future, and that brings a certain amount of excited anxiety, if you like, right? That sort of positive feeling that you're talking about that can really connect you to the moment, versus aversion to some particular possibility of outcome, right? And so the trepidation that one feels as stepping into the unknown is not the same as the trepidation one feels stepping into, oh God, I hope this particular thing doesn't happen.
Right.
Right. And I think that's kind of the difference that we're pointing at here.
Yeah, and when you frame it like that, Eric, I see even more of a distinction. Like there seems less continuity between those two. They seem almost like different, really different senses of the word. Um, because when I'm anxious, when I'm worried about playing over my head, it could even be in the past, like something someone said to me, and I think that they were making some negative comment about my haircut or whatever, or I'm worried about a specific negative outcome on like I'm going to give a presentation, it's going to go terribly. That trepidation, which is maybe a good label we could pin to it, feels very different than like as you say, um, facing the unknown. And I guess when I'm feeling anxiety, it's almost like a war between those two things. Like the trepidation of the known negatives, known and maybe it's sort of not even consciously known, but like sort of still anticipated of like if I'm going to open up, I might get hurt. I don't know to what degree I can call that known, but there's that sort of still kind of more definite negative outcome. But then the thing that's attracting me is the unknown, unknowability of what comes at the other side and how exciting that can be.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that I think there's an element of control and agency that's really important. And as you know, as you were talking, Eric, I was thinking about the like back in the COVID time when we didn't really know when the lockdowns were going to end, and when we're going to return back to normal, inverted commas, and it was just that not knowing. It did create a kind of crippling anxiety that's very different to sort of anxiety that you can sort of almost transmute into excitement before public speaking or engaging in something. And I think that sort of that is a very interesting, that whole collective free floating anxiety that I can't remember the guy's name, but he talked about it leading to the sort of mass formation hypnosis and
Mm.
having a big impact. And that just seems very different. If there's no agency or control you have to find a way through, I think you get to a very sort of debilitating and crippling type of anxiety.
Yeah, that was coming up for me as well. It's Matthias Desmet, who's the author.
Yeah.
And I saw him in conversation with Ian McGilchrist recently, and because of that, I actually went and listened to his book. But it's a few things are tying together for me around this. One is valence. So there can be a sensation that can have a valence, like positive or negative, so trepidation or anxiety or whatever. So there's a feeling, sensation, and then like how that gets interpreted. And there are various things on that, like noticing sensations arising and potentially, I think somebody said something about playing with it. Like I'm noticing the sensation arising and maybe having some agency and what valence to attribute to it. And then there's other ones where it's just sort of happening to us, or we feel like that. Like my brother talking about a couple of weeks ago, we just had this low grade anxiety, but didn't have anything to point to specifically, and just kind of his solution to that, I think, was adopting the stance of I am the generator of, or I can be the generator of my state and the experience that I'm having. So anyway, there's a few other things, but I'll say.
Well, yeah, so I'll just throw in. So now I think there's sort of two levels of agency that are on the table. One level of agency is the sort of the more practical unfolding events in themselves. So like if I am in conversation and I feel anxiety about stepping into the unknown with somebody, but I feel like I have agency that will certainly be more attractive than if I'm in a conversation and they say, "Hey, Logan, we need to talk," and I have no idea what's coming, and I know I can't decide to go on into that unknown, but I know it's coming. That's much more unpleasant and, as Magnus says, debilitating. And then Josh, I think you're speaking more to agency of how you react to the feelings themselves, which is sort of another interesting
Mm.
level to throw in. So I just wanted to put those framings around those things.
That low level free floating anxiety, I mean, it was particularly prevalent during COVID, and it's not so much fear of the unknown, it's the fear of this might never end, right? Like, I can see no end in sight. This might never end because I can't see the end of it. Like that might have been part of the underlying. But what I was going to say was this free floating anxiety. It comes from all directions. You know that, oh God, I'm going to miss the bus. I'm going to be late for the meeting. I'm going to, oh shit, I haven't finished my homework. Whatever it might be, like there are a million deadline, timetable, other people's expectations driven sources of anxiety around all the time. So the degree to which we are all experiencing some level of anxiety in the background all the fucking time. Do you know what I mean? And a lot of it is entirely unnecessary anxiety. It's internally generated. Oh shit, I should be doing this. Internally generated shoulds must generate an enormous amount of our experience, of our felt sense of anxiety.
I've noticed here and there in myself, my mind will I'll be driving somewhere or whatever, and I'll every once in a while I'll catch myself. I don't know. I mean, this must be sort of almost always happening or frequently happening, but every once in a while I'll catch myself going, what shall I be anxious about now? What's the next problem that is in my life? I kind of like quickly, just below consciousness. Like I said, I just barely glimpse it sometimes, and like, oh, that's something I can worry about. There's a part of my mind that's sort of gleefully going through the filing cabinet of everything that could be stressing me out and picking another one, and now I have something to chew on. Um, and I wonder, I really don't know. I really wonder about how natural that is. There's a sense in which it seems natural and kind of makes sense because evolutionarily you would want to be you would sort of you'd sort of want to evolutionarily you'd want to be a creature that is almost constantly solving any possible problem in order of likelihood. So you'd kind of want this low level process going, what's a good plausible thing to worry about? Oh, what about global warming? And you might, there's an argument to be made that you would worry, like, let's constantly worry so that in the future we're sort of slowly knocking down any possible problem. At the same time, there's the signature of that process in my head seems very like it just seems very kin to um our the problems in our culture, the sort of the what's the word I'm looking for, the the sickness in our culture, like there's something about this, oh, what's the next thing to worry about, that feels very akin to like sort of modernism, go, 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 the hustle. And so I don't really know what to make of that. It seems like I feel clear indications that it's both natural and also completely unnatural. And that's putting aside the whole question of whether it's healthy, of course, as well, which it probably is not, but
Yeah, just to add to that, I think I'd like to put forward a proposition that a small amount of anxiety is important and useful from an evolutionary perspective, but like something's gone deeply wrong with our sort of mismatch with our sort of evolutionary background and the modern world, and that I would suggest that a general like deep unhealthiness, a kind of lack of energy that people have, a lethargy that's probably come from all sorts of, environmental toxins and various issues, our lifestyles and so on is one aspect. And I think this dominant sort of left hemisphere tendency that we're stuck in as well, that's kind of reinforced by our language and the whole kind of structure of our modern life. So I think it's a lot more natural to have a lot more life force as a human being, and to have a much clearer mind that's not looping, that's more in the present moment. And I say it's not either or, but it's more in that direction.
Hmm.
And with that energy and life force and internal quiet, it's just so much easier to have a can-do attitude. There's not, you don't have anxiety if you know you can overcome challenges and you can overcome big challenges. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's tracking with where my mind's been going with this, and it relates with my brother's approach to, addressing that anxiety. It's it I whenever I think about this stuff, I think about uh basically returning to the wisdom of the body, like our embodied intelligence, because that's, the modernity steers us away from that. And we, with our complex consciousness and our ability to imagine different scenarios, it can't, like, a certain amount of anxiety, or um, playing with the potential problems that could manifest. A certain amount of that is useful, but if we're focusing on hyper objects like climate change or whatever, then basically discernment brings the awareness as much back to where we have agency, like embodied agency, and that, being having confidence that we can solve problems. Well, like earlier, before we started recording, I think we were talking about potentially, or no, during the questions game, exposing ourselves to um, uh, challenging situations. For example, people going through SEALs training or whatever. Like, you see yourself overcoming challenges, then that builds your sense of capacity, and almost certainly will reduce the amount of anxiety that you experience. Maybe not. There's this thing about a set point, and maybe people still, yeah, I'm not sure about that, but that seems likely, at least.
What seems likely?
That facing, seeing us facing challenges, reducing anxiety because we're more confident about our ability to handle basically any situation that shows up.
Hmm.
So I'm noticing in myself quite a lot of resistance to this idea that some level of anxiety or other is a good amount of anxiety to have, right? Because it makes us aware of problems and motivates us to fix them. Something like that is what I'm hearing. And as I say, I'm feeling a lot of resistance to this. Magnus said something which I really agreed with, right? Like the degree to which you are confident in your capacity and agency to face situations as they present themselves to you. This is a good way for anxiety to be minimized. But my sense is, and I think that probably you guys disagree with this, but my sense is that anxiety is actually a malfunction of the nervous system, right? That anxiety is not something that we're fear, yes, but anxiety, this, or not even fear, fright, right? Like a sense of threat to something that is a threat. Yes, we can experience that, but I feel like anxiety is purely a creation in our own minds, and that we have been conditioned to do this by the culture in which we grow up, and the culture in which we live, which identifies the world as a series of problems to be fixed, as opposed to an unfolding event, right, in which we participate and respond to the situations that present themselves. And so I believe that anxiety is a illness, a psychological illness, ubiquitous, and so we don't think of it in that way, but it's a psychological illness that comes about as a consequence of thinking about the world as a problem to be fixed.
One thought that occurs to me on that is, like, maybe modern anxiety is like a metastasization of the signal that is actually useful, because like I was saying earlier, it does make sense to, think about potential futures, and then, try to work out how we would handle those things. And so like good war planners or whatever, good planners in general, are looking at trying to assess and analyze or whatever, understand as much as what's needed to be competent in what they're planning for. And it feels to me like like if we have discernment about the sensations that are arising, we can notice when something that could turn into this anxiety, it's a signal that can like metastasize into something more long lasting and not really productive and whatever. But at some level, that sense is there for a reason, probably.
I wonder if we need to distinguish between a kind of a situational anxiety, as you were saying, Josh, maybe war planning, you implement a strategy, but then you're waiting for a period of time to see the outcome. And that there could be anxiety for that limited period of time versus sort of more intrinsic anxiety. And I was thinking as Erik was talking, even though I've said multiple times that maybe a little bit of anxiety is a good thing, I'm thinking of that book by a psychologist called The Continuum Concept, where ideally children are brought up constantly in touch, being touched by their mothers and fathers, and there is that deep sense of being held and connected to everything, and that the outcome is they're a lot more peaceful and relaxed and have a good foundation in life, which would probably be the opposite of just have a background of anxiety. So yeah, I would like that to be true.
I want to sort of highlight two things Erik said, or two responses perhaps I have, Erik. One is that there was something, there was one thing you said that I really liked, which was that you sort of put in contrast a state of anxiety against sort of this other approach of like, we are here in an unfolding moment and our job is to sort of be in relationship with that. It's very much my words sort of put on what you were describing there. Um, and I really like that. In fact, it seems beautiful. And certainly when you put it that way, it definitely seems like you almost couldn't have enough of the latter. Like the more you can sort of adopt the frame of, I'm just here in this moment, things are unfolding, nothing is really wrong or right, at least into worrying of a sense, and let's just respond here in the moment. That certainly it's it seems like that could possibly be best in all cases to do that instead of go the anxiety route. And then the other thing I wanted to comment on is I sort of want to propose that what Erik is labeling as anxiety and having a lot of resistance to, and sort of making the case that we should really almost have none of it. Perhaps what he's pointing at is sort of what maybe it was certainly me or maybe some of the others here we're seeing sort of when we use the word anxiety, we're pointing at a bigger spectrum of things for which the negative side, I think we would all agree with Erik, is sort of worth eliminating completely. And maybe that has a lot like this, this part of my brain that's always looking for a problem to solve and something to stress about, I have a strong suspicion that insofar as we could step away from words and definitions, which of course is impossible because we're using them. That's the whole thing we're doing here is using words. But I suspect that like underneath the words, there's actually not a lot of disagreement on everything Erik said and everything that we said, even though and it's just sort of, the word anxiety is almost too broad. So we're kind of, almost stumbling over that a little bit. That's my suspicion. Not that it's a bad thing, but I think that's kind of what's going on a little bit.
I agree with you that it's a semantic point, but I would still push back a little bit on this sort of spectrum of anxiety. Again, it is a semantic point, but I think I don't think it's a pedantic point.
Mm.
The sort of things you're talking about, I would use words like focus and urgency and this kind of thing, right? Which I don't feel that anxiety, again, for me, the way I use the word, I take your point about the anxiety I'm referring to as a relatively narrow part of a larger spectrum, but I think the other parts of that spectrum have words in the language that we could use, you know what I mean? And I'm not sure I would call the spectrum anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
fair.
yeah, that's where I think the apparent, as you say, I don't think we're actually in any kind of disagreement at all, but that's where the apparent difference is arising from, I think.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, I just want to uh, second that and maybe clarify. Um, 'Cause if when we use labels, right, then things can get confusing if we have slightly different understandings about what those are. But I think I think we all would all agree that there are useful versions of um, what if over a long period could turn into what we would call anxiety. There's a short-term momentary version of that, which is like, hey, there's this thing that is calling my attention. Um,
There's
and
like
that
an
that could
initial
turn into
signal.
focus. Yeah, it could turn into focus, engagement, whatever, rather than anxiety. And also, it's occurred to me many times that a lot of what we're experiencing in modernity is um, obviously there's like the toxins and stuff, but like too much more free time, and the ability for that free floating anxiety to form because of that free time
Hmm.
um, is one aspect. Where, like when things are very immediate in a crisis, a lot of times people feel they get into flow just because it's obvious what needs to be done. Like I need to run
Exactly.
away from that thing or over here, whatever.
You're not
So
paralyzed with anxiety while the house is burning down. You know what to do.
right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
great.
So yeah, that is great because it's given me some. Oh, sorry, Magnus, I didn't see your hand up. Go ahead. I can come back later. Go ahead.
It was just really to respond to Erik, and I was just thinking about it. It is good to use more clarifying type of language and things like focus and excitement, um, and um, it, 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 it it's very easy to get into a state where you're just kind of very blockish and I'm happy or I'm sad, and you've got those two emotions that you that kind of rule your life. But the more sort of distinguishing emotional descriptors you can use, I think it opens up uh, I guess more emotional territory. And I know there's a psychologist or a neuroscientist who believes that having the more distinguishing words we have for emotions, the more we can better kind of
Mhm.
self-regulate our own energy levels.
Yeah, yeah.
It's bringing to
So,
mind the
oh,
right.
sorry.
Well, I,
I'll just put my hand
it's
up.
bringing to mind the rider and the elephant, and the rider wants more words to understand what the elephant is doing. And then I have two reactions to that. One is like, well, who cares? The rider has very little power, but at the same time, the rider does have some power, and the words is very much it's the rider's domain. And um, anyway, it was just a thought that came up. Please go ahead, Erik.
Yeah, no, no. This has been really good, especially what Josh said gave me a little moment of clarity because I think there's a difference in kind here, right? Like it's not just scales, it's not just gradations on a scale. I think there's a difference in kind insofar as things like urgency and focus and you know immediate need, that kind of stuff. These focus and they enable collaboration, right? They encourage and enable collaboration, whereas anxiety, in the way that I'm talking about it, in the way I feel the word, is a like an internal feedback loop of what if and then what and then what and then what, right? It's that, and it's
Hmm.
dissipative, right? And it's disconnecting and
It's
it
got
and
a
it and
trap
it's
of
and
some
it's
sort.
Exactly, exactly. Like it's an internal trap that we generate for ourselves and burn all our energy in that trap, so we can't actually do anything anymore. So I do think it's a difference in kind. I think it's again the way I feel the word. It's a difference. Go ahead.
Yeah, I find sort of in response to you, Erik, I find myself wanting to sort of target another part of the spectrum or the field, I suppose, because you're sort of saying it's almost more multidimensional than just a spectrum. And
Yeah.
there's a feeling I get, again, my example I keep going to is opening up in conversation. There's a feeling I get in my belly that is, um, I couldn't quite call it pleasant or unpleasant. It's some mixture or warring of those two. And the best word, is there a better word for it than anxiety? Nervousness, maybe, but that's almost a synonym, and it certainly doesn't get rid of the negative aspect. But there's a sense in which there's a feeling I get in my belly that is not it's not simply pleasant. I'll definitely be able to say that. It's not
Yeah.
also not simply unpleasant, but it's something.
How about a
And
nervous, uneasy excitement?
yeah, all those terms can apply. It's nervousness, it's uneasiness, it's excitement, it's anxiety. It's for me, all those sort of fit in different, they overlap that feeling in different ways. And I just I guess the point I'm finding myself trying to get to is I suspect that the negative valence of that is sort of inseparable from the thing that would be wise to follow. You know, there's almost like the fact that there's negativity in it is part of what let's say, I'll propose. I'll propose that the signature that would is wise to follow, especially in conversation, and maybe especially if you're trying to have deep conversation like dialogos, that signature contains negativity in some sense, like that and anxiety. Again, I go right to this word anxiety, and I guess that I'm sort of I find myself sort of targeting this in response to you, Eric. There's something that when you talk about the anxiety that you is pretty much entirely negative for you, and you want to sort of eliminate or get rid of or combat, whatever word, pick your word. I have this response of like there's some part of it that I want to sort of dive in with you and say, well, there's this part though that seems crucial. Yeah, go ahead, Magnus.
I mean, there is a sort of framing you could put that if, for example, you're going to do something that could be anxiety inducing, like public speaking, and you're not really prepared and you haven't practiced, and you're not in your body. There's quite a few things that actually you probably should be anxious about, or at least that anxiety is telling you that you're not prepared, you're not ready.
Mm.
And then when you are prepared and you are ready, that anxiety isn't there, and you're confident and focused and all the rest of it.
That's the
And so
proper,
it, it,
right.
it's still good information, right? And it can be used to help us to level up in some way.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I feel like that was a really good sort of culmination of making some kind of point. And I'm really curious what Eric thinks about it.
Yeah, well, I've just had another thought, which is completely that maybe this anxiety is just it's like a basket word, right? It's not actually pointing. It's because that the public speaking example that Magnus just used, and it's a really good one, right? Because there's a whole range of possibilities. If you feel like you're prepared and you know what you're going to say and you've practiced and so on, it certainly takes away some of the anxiety. But now, what is that anxiety exactly, right? Like this is I think a really interesting self-inquiry. But if you feel anxious because you haven't prepared, how much of that is like the fear of your performance being bad, and what's that actually rooted in, that people are going to think poorly of you, they're going to laugh at you, whatever, right? Like that. And so all of this stuff is actually internally generated, what other people are going to think of me. Like you're not actually going to, the organism is not actually going to come to any harm here. So that's yeah, sorry, just one more quick thing. Yeah, and being prepared, however well prepared you are, doesn't relieve you from all of that anxiety. But also, if you're not prepared, how much self-recrimination and shame are you feeling for not having prepared, and how much of that are we calling anxiety? I wonder how much of a basket word anxiety is.
Yeah, well, I want to push back on one part of what you said earlier, which is the idea that the anxiety is self-generated. I think it's not quite right because yes, well, it's certainly right in the sense that anxiety comes from my mental processes, and obviously we could talk all day about examples in which it's gone haywire and is obviously a maladaptation where you get into this trap that we were talking about earlier. But these all these cycles in our minds and all the habits, maladaptive or not, come from interaction with the real world. We're actually not a brain sort of in space somewhere. And so while on one hand you could say that oh, my mind is just generating anxiety, I'm not in any real physical danger. I don't think that's quite I think that's too simplistic of a view because our mind was shaped that way in interaction with reality. That's one sort of point. And then if I'm afraid of making a fool of myself in front of my peers, I mean, yeah, that's not going to kill me like a spear through the heart kills me, but it does affect my income possibly. There are these indirect effects, and I think Magnus was or some one of us was pointing out, we're sort of in this modern environment where I'm not really worried about not being able to eat enough food. So what do I worry about? Well, I suppose I worry about esteem from my peers. And then that's not only about my survival, but about my sexual fitness as well, right? So what is my point here? I guess my point is that yes, these things are internally generated, but they're not simply sort of a phantasm of my internal mental state. There is a connection to reality, both in the sense that reality has shaped my mind and my brain the way that it's responding right now, and also that there are arguable connections to real outcomes, whatever we even mean by real outcomes. And then somehow that all seems connected to this idea that like we live in sort of a model of reality. Our minds aren't in reality so much as they're sort of generating a model of reality based on what our senses give us. I don't know how that last piece fits in there. It just seems related. So I'll drop that all on the table there for y'all. Yeah, Josh.
Yeah. A few things are occurring to me. There's the um, so partly a lot of our anxiety or our whatever the sort of the feelings that like we worry about what other people are going to think, our esteem, our reputation. That's just baked into us. Like we're these social creatures that ejection or rejection from the tribe, you know, means death basically, or at least very very harsh outcomes. So um, it's not it's not maladaptive to have some of those feelings around like how we're going to perform in front of other people. There's also things about like we have different upbringings and our relationship to things like anxiety or rage, just like a lot of our formative experiences kind of give us different levels of agency on interacting with these, the energies that can lead to things like anxiety or rage or whatever. So, we're sort of like intellectually discussing things around feelings, and it is useful. It feels like so, like the elephant and the rider thing, or us having more descriptive language about what our experience is. We can both understand what we're going through, what that experience is for ourselves, and communicate it to others, which can help in obviously, in our relational ability. The more we're able to describe our experience and communicate that to others, as well as to ourselves. Yeah.
Um, being forthright. So again, going back to the example of not having prepared properly for this presentation that you're giving, being found out would be a large part of the anxiety, right? Oh God, they're going to realize that I don't really know what I'm talking about, or something like that, right? So this sense of being exposed and being found out. But what if you walked up on stage and said, listen, I'm sorry, I really haven't prepared this nearly as thoroughly as I'd hoped to do. I will do my best, but forgive the rough edges. Now, there's something about walking into what is making you anxious and speaking it, which causes the anxiety around it to evaporate, right? It now just becomes the situation, the reality of the situation, right? Rather than some imagined horrible manifestation of the situation.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's right. And just to sort of throw a even more extreme example, if you were suddenly told, "Hey, in 5 minutes you got to go and speak," like you don't even, I'm just a guy. You go up there, be like, "Hey, I don't know what's going on. They told me to, I don't know what's." So your first move is to sort of settle that anxiety. It's probably still not going to be a very pleasant experience, but and yeah, it happens in conversation too. It's one of my favorite moves. It's to be like, "Hey, I'm really nervous about this," but just like levels things somehow. Yeah, Magnus.
Yeah, I think there are all sorts of yeah, obviously tricks and things you can do to mitigate anxiety. I, I just know personally for me that whole preparation thing is quite key. Just and I think it's maybe it's a neurological thing, right? I think we've all got slightly different brain patterns, and I find with that a little bit of emotional stress that comes with just talking in front of a lot of people, um, it's it's almost like the different hemispheres or the different cortices stop talking to each other. The kind of the whole thing like crashes a little bit, and I'm really my fear is around just completely forgetting what I'm saying, totally losing my my train of thought, right? And just sort of freezing. And I know from experience, it happens quite easily because it just see I think it's the way that my brain is. Right? It could probably do with some more connections. And I think that probably there's like a hardware level to that contributes to in certain circumstances my anxiety.
Another thought has just occurred to me that maybe the useful purpose that anxiety serves is pointing us at things to which we are having resistance, right? That's what that feeling is there's something you're resisting here. You need to see it and embrace it or walk into it or whatever it is, right? And that's the purpose of it, maybe.
It's interesting you bring that up because I was just sort of somewhere while Magnus was speaking, I was reflecting that if I'm playing a video game but I have chores to do, the thing that kicks me out of the video game is anxiety. I'm less immersed in the game. I'm kind of like very much not in the moment, which is also an interesting connection to some of our earlier words. Uh, and I'm like I'm finding it more difficult to be present in the game, and then I'm kicked out into something. Well, yeah, anxiety is that first initial signal, which touches on, Josh kept framing it in terms of like an initial signal, which I also want to keep coming back to. I don't know if my point's making much sense because I feel like I'm jumping around a lot, but well, so I'll just leave it there. So I don't know what I did there. Maybe not much, but
Yeah, no, that's another way of saying what I was trying to say is that it can be useful signal, right? When we feel anxious, it can be useful signal. Okay,
right,
what are you resisting?
right, yeah, resisting exactly.
Yeah. I feel like again, it's like labels. We're dancing around this word anxiety, but is it really appropriate? Like the thing that pulls you out of the video game, is it really anxiety, or is a different word more like appropriate or descriptive? It's something. There's some you're getting some signal that's telling you like it's causing you to have thoughts and whatever, maybe images. It's it's letting you know like what you're doing. You should probably shift your
Yeah,
focus and
yeah,
take action in a different direction, whatever that is. Maybe anxiety is the best word, but yeah, go ahead.
yeah. I just want to sort of reflect and amplify that I think you've sort of pointed at, and it's putting the labels aside for the moment. I think you've pointed at something we can sort of demarcate very well, which is the feeling that you're not doing the right thing at the moment, which is interesting because that could be both seen as a negative thing because that will get you out of the moment, maybe when you shouldn't be out of the moment, but could also get you to get up and do your fucking chores or whatever it is. Um,
See,
so
I would call that conscience.
conscience. Yeah, it's very similar to conscious, and the word sin comes to mind too. It's like the awareness that you are sinning in a more, and I
Yeah,
don't mean to make it too
yeah,
Christian, but like
missing the mark.
missing
Yeah,
the
yeah,
mark
yeah.
exactly.
Mark,
Yeah.
To the mark. Yeah.
Yeah. My gaming becomes a bit of, I'm starting to feel like I'm sneaking around. I'm a little bit more of a devilish demon kind of guy playing my games, right? And then it's like, oh, that's a signal. I should maybe be doing something else.
That's interesting, actually. That you obviously got the seven deadly sins, and with the ancient Egyptian kind of power to your Enneagram system, you had nine deadly sins, and fear was one of those sins. And fear is quite close in some ways to anxiety.
Mm,
And yeah.
here's the mind killer.
right.
Mm, mm.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we got this came up much earlier in the conversation, but So I'm if we're going to attach labels and have spectrums, I would say like fear, anxiety, acceptance, peace, something like that would be a nice spectrum.
And then I want to jump in again and sort of put something right in the middle. So fear, anxiety, and then on one side, and then acceptance and peace. And there's something in the middle that I keep wanting to, like, again, in this moment, I want to like rescue there somehow, where, because
Well,
I
that's
know
your
that
love of symmetry, isn't it? That's
I don't
you
know.
want
No,
something
it's
straddling the middle.
well, it just no, it was that the jump between fear, anxiety, and then acceptance and peace, there was like such a big jump there. And I noticed that. And then I also sort of want to return almost to this response to what you're saying, which is like, what is it that's in the middle that that I value? What is it that's in the middle that I feel like has been a worthy signal to follow for myself that leads me to open up in conversations and leads me to try things that are new? Go ahead, Magnus.
Yeah, there is a spectrum of
I'm
acceptance, though,
just
right? There's grudging acceptance to effortless acceptance, say something like that.
No, that's true. That's good. That's a good point. You've that right. No, you've made that continuity clear. That's right. Because it when I do choose to step forward, when I'm attracted to step forward, there's a sense of acceptance. Like, okay, if it goes bad, it goes bad. There's like, okay, then there's acceptance. So that's a good point. Yeah, Magnus.
and this is not my idea. It's David, is it Hawkins? But uh, the idea that pivot point, in that spectrum that goes from anxiety and fear and so on all the way up to acceptance and peace, would be something like courage as an emotional state. That would be the sort of the tipping point that you go
Right.
from these sort of debilitating emotions like fear, maybe even like envy or shame. Shame would be maybe on the lowest end of the spectrum, right? And
Yeah,
then
Right.
yeah.
but the courage is like a transition from a sort of negative state to a positive state.
Hmm.
Um,
Or despair.
yeah,
Despair
yeah.
can serve that function. Can serve that function
Yes.
as well.
I keep coming back to this like labels and language, and trying
Yeah,
to pin
yeah,
things
yeah.
down. There's experience, there are sensations, there are, and like, as was referenced earlier, like a sensation can be interpreted in different ways. Like, so, a spectrum, uh, multidimensional makes more sense to me because, like I said, there's a experience, yeah, valence. Like, does this thing feel more positive or negative? Maybe we're not sure. Kind of, we're we're in the moment and experiencing things, and then obviously language is useful, and we all know what words like shame and jealousy are pointing to, but just kind of like the quantum nature of reality versus the kind of materialistic and whatever. It's like one is more fundamentally true, and so the more that we can understand and describe and interact with things in that multidimensional quantum kind of way, the more adaptive we're going to be. But yeah, words and pinning things down is obviously useful too.
Hmm.
Well, I actually think what we've been doing, like dancing around and trying out different words and different language and different vocabularies and so on, I think that's really helpful to get to the actual thing that we're trying to communicate about.
Right.
Understanding that words are imperfect means that using approaching it from lots of different vocabularies can be really helpful. Yeah, and I think that we've actually been quite good at doing that.
Yeah, it's like the thing that we're pursuing has a vibrant, sort of unnameable, undescribable heart, but we're using
Exactly.
words to actually make the journey.
Yeah, definitely there's a lot of semantics going on, but behind that there is a there, right? There is a real thing, and
Hmm.
that we all experience and embody, and it's definitely worthy of inquiring into and understanding more.
And I wanted to
Because I
go.
mean,
Oh, go ahead.
ultimately, who wants to be anxious all the time? Sorry, who wants
Right.
to be anxious? So, in terms of like what the most practical thing from this discussion is, well, how do we not be anxious? In
Right.
fact, how do we, just blast through that and just experience life as wonderful and so on?
Well, I was just going to say, I want to go back to the word courage. That I think that's an important word. Uh, and it it occurs to me that it sort of touches on what I noticed about when Josh, earlier in the call, Josh said something, and I pointed out that there's two levels of agency. There's the level of agency of what are you going to physically do in the world, and whether you have that agency or not makes the anxiety pleasant or not, or can make it more or less unpleasant or more addressable. And then there's the internal agency of like, how do you handle the internal, and it strikes me that courage is a pivot point in both. Like there's a sense that when you have courage, it seems, I guess I'll make this a proposal. I propose that to have courage, the act of being courageous is in significant part an internal move. You kind of do this internal sort of pivot of um fuck it, I'm gonna do it anyway. There's this kind of internal move that then enables the external, the actual actions that you do.
One other thing that keeps coming up for me is the oh sorry, I can wait.
Okay, yeah, if you don't mind, because this kind of connects to what Logan was saying. Yeah, so that's the sort of fuck it kind of courage, right? Like you just right. Well, I don't know what's going to happen. I know I'm frightened, but fuck it. I know I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it anyway, right? That kind of thing. Um, but that I wonder whether the real courage is to let go of being anxious about things, right? Like we love our, you pointed to this earlier, Logan, right? Like I just underneath the surface is this looking for something to be anxious about because we're addicted to that feeling of being anxious about stuff, right? And so maybe the really courageous thing is to let go of that need to be anxious. I was going to just ask a question and then yield. I wonder whether it is worth each of us talking a little bit about our own personal relationship with anxiety in our lives, whether that might be worth exploring a little bit.
Magnus?
Yeah, I mean, well, I was just going to say that for myself, I've noticed a pattern that, and it relates to this being addicted to anxiety or something similar anyway, is that almost certainly I have a bit of a dysregulated nervous system through various early childhood, premature birth, that sort of thing. But there is a tendency to want to find that if all the things that sort of justify my anxious state are taken away, then I want to look for other things that kind of justify it. And I just notice that as a tendency. I've heard other people talk about that as well. And it's almost like it just makes sense, you know. And there's nothing wrong with me if there's a damn good reason for me being anxious. But if there is no reason, then there's something wrong with me. And yeah, go ahead, Logan.
Yeah, well, this very much rhymes with one of my favorite sort of points I like to make, which is that humans love problems, really, actually, and when we run out of problems, we go find more. Playing games is very much a creation of a new problem to chew on, uh, and to be okay with to have peace with the understanding that you will always find more problems, you'll never run out. Like that is one of the ways that at least I've found sort of a meta piece in my life. Like no matter how wrong shit's going, I'm like, well, I could always tell myself, well, what did you expect? The problems were just never going to happen anymore. You did expect to run out of problems? Of course not. It kind of gives me a piece, and that I think connects to this hunch that there is something natural and uneliminatable about anxiety. And there's also the sense that as humans, we have a special relationship to anxiety because we have a special relationship to time. We are the creatures that consider different futures and think about which one we want. And to worry about the futures that we don't want and to try to avoid them seems to perhaps is an is a crucial, uneliminatable part of that process, which and that part of it we could call anxiety, or anxiety might cover. The bucket term might sort of overlap with that. Yeah, Magnus. Or I don't know if Josh had
And
your hand.
I just wonder if there is something. Oh, sorry, Josh.
I can go after. That's fine.
I was just going to say, I wonder if there's just something intrinsic about the human experience because, particularly in the modern world, because there are so many possibilities and options of ways you can live your life and explore things, and yet there isn't like it's not like we have a manual about how to best optimize being a human being and like understanding a strong sense of purpose or some sort of very strong vertical idea of uh, growing and developing and moving towards some divine source of return, or some sort of story that might have been present in the ancient world. We don't have that. And I just know in myself, I've always been a very anxious person, but I've been a lot less anxious when I have a lot of conviction
Yep.
about my path and direction in life.
Like when the house
Yeah,
is burning down.
I'm glad you went first because that ties in directly or with, well, a couple of things. One, very much resonating with the like addicted to anxiety. Like it's like the devil we know. We have a kind of a set point or a state that we're accustomed to, whether or not it's pleasant. It's familiar, right? So if we're used to being anxious, we'll find reasons for our anxiety. It's like it's the writer trying to yeah, like reverse engineer reasons why the elephant is feeling a certain way or going in a certain direction. The other one was what Magnus was saying. I mentioned faith earlier because it's been on my mind as far as like an anchor for like navigating difficult situations. I just listened through the condensed version of the Gulag Archipelago, and Solzhenitsyn mentioned that people with faith, and he was a person of faith, um, could handle this, tended to be able to handle the situation much better with more um, aplomb, with more just because they have this faith that things are unfolding according to God's plan. And so, they can be going through this hardship and find, a meaning or and a trust that when, if it leads to death, there is, whatever their particular faith tradition is, that they have some understanding, a story that grounds them in this sort of faith that whatever occurs, I'll be. And that's a different version than the one of like, Navy SEALs, or like putting yourself through situations beforehand. It's just more of this sinking into a trust in things are unfolding according to whatever you believe in, and operating from that place.
Yeah, I really like this faith um, element that's coming in. When I make a decision to be courageous, I think it always involves some kind of faith. And whether that's religious in nature is sort of maybe a semantic or a pedantic point even. But well, I guess I'll just say it's perhaps important to say for some people, I used to have such a negative reaction, like an allergic reaction to the word faith. And now I see it as almost essential to a life that is, I'll say, trivially comforting. Like for me to live a life where I'm not constantly fighting just to be okay, I have to have faith that things are going to turn out okay. I have to have some kind of faith. And for me, that's turned into a very religious thing, or it's pointing in a religious direction. Um, this big thing of faith touches on both what I see, let's say, Christians have, like, let's say real deep Christians in the sense they really have this faith in God, but it also connects to sort of like I have a faith that if I open up on the other side, it's going to be okay. Um, I don't know where I'm going with there, so I'll leave it there.
So I think it's worth distinguishing between two different kinds of faith. This faith that if I do this thing that I'm frightened of doing, it's going to turn out okay. That's a belief, right? Faith is I'm going to do this thing because I feel called to do it, or I know my heart is telling me to do it, or whatever. And not knowing is fine, right? The faith is being willing to accept is being willing to accept the unknown, willing to accept the not knowing. Whereas belief is going ahead based on it's going to be okay because.
Right.
I think it's worth mentioning that I think just the use of this word faith is in itself a very large inquiry topic. And
Absolutely.
yeah, some of these words like trust, conviction, yeah, distinguishing belief. I mean, I like to think that there's a place we can get to through developing senses like discernment, maybe even spiritual discernment, but also a very fine attunement to, I guess, to what's beyond us, right out there. We call it the universe, but whatever's out there, that there's a sense where you can almost intuitively palpate reality and have a sense of what's coming based on your action in the tent and so on. And it becomes, it moves more to a way of being that I think that the languages like faith kind of fall away a little bit. And I always think like faith is like it's a Buddhist metaphor, but if you're swinging on a rope to get from one end of a chasm or something to another to solid land on the other side, you kind of need that faith just to make that leap. But I think once you get to a place where your senses are more attuned and perhaps your right hemisphere is more engaged, that you can almost let that faith go because um, you're in a different place.
The way that's landing for me is, and again, words, labels, faith. I mean, it, as I was sort of sensing into it, I resonate very much with this, like basically like contact with reality, kind of, like the more right brain embodied, and using as much of the embodied intelligence that we have, and the more that we can clear away cobwebs, things like anxiety that are taking us out of the present moment, like those signals are there for a reason usually. Then it's like take the action and trust, faith, whatever, like in yeah, that, and not being attached to outcome, as Erik was saying, right? Like whether it's swinging across the canyon on a rope, or going in to make a presentation, or going onto a battlefield. I mean, it's the more we can be engaged with what we're faced with and experiencing, and in touch with how best to navigate that. That's and having, whether trust or faith, whatever words we want to use, but being, I think, is what Magnus said.
Yeah, I like this note you keep hitting, Josh, of sort of treating anxiety or thinking of it like a signal. And I think your point there was sort of that, well, I'll sort of make my own point that I think will echo it, which is that perhaps a man of faith, of deep faith, it's not that he has no anxiety, it's that he notices it right away and then he responds to it and it goes away. It doesn't grow into this monster. And he is oh, that's not the right thing. Oh, I'll just do that. And then it's gone. And maybe in some sense even has more anxiety in the sense that he'll get those pings more often, but respond to them and be more responsive to the moment in that way. Yeah, I think Magnus, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I was just thinking about this. Uh, I don't know why it just sticks in my mind quite a bit, but it's almost like moving from a very left brain, materialistic view of the world, a kind of atomistic world, to something that's more animistic and mystical, um, where there is perhaps a divine presence. It's not easy to move from one state to another. Right? There's like it feels like there's a lake of fire or something in between, and if you don't have faith, you'll never get across the other side. That's for me, that's where the where faith is so important. Once you've got to the other side, faith is just a word. It's not so important. But it because you're living it, you're experiencing it. But if you're in the materialistic paradigm, and it affects your worldview, I don't think you can get across the other side without faith. Maybe there could be a profound transformative experience that could do that. But yeah.
That's interesting. It kind of situates religion in an interesting way. It makes me wonder if religion is a tool for that exactly. Because if you're in that sort of right hemisphere in the moment mode, maybe you don't need Christianity, let's say. But if
Yeah.
you are sort of operating more from a procedural, explicit frame of mind, something like Christianity could give you, oh, here's a book, here's the rituals, here's the stories, here's the protocol. You go through the protocol and then you end up on sort of ideally um, on the other side of that lake of fire, possibly. Like it's sort of a tool for faith.
That's what the word means, isn't it? To reconnect, to rebind.
What word?
That's what religion.
Oh, right,
Oh, yeah.
right.
It's interesting that the word Tool is coming up because I in recent months have been listening to a lot of Tool, the band.
Hmm.
They and they I, the subjects that they get into connect very much with what we're talking about here. There's this one song, Lateralis, which it's basically about being present. It's about there's a lot of Fibonacci sequence stuff. Eric, I remember your presentation on spirals, but and the last lines of the song are spiral out, keep going. And we may just we'll follow the spiral till the end and may just go where no one's been. With my feet upon the ground, I lose myself between the sounds and open wide to suck it in and feel it move across my skin. Like it's describing the experience of being alive and being engaged and then being open to possibilities and new potentials that maybe have never existed, that kind of thing.
It's very expansive.
Yeah, and they named the band that because they aim to be a tool for people to help, realize deep truths and yeah, evolve. There's one, yeah, anyway. Um I had another point, but I got all excited talking about Tool, so we'll see if it comes back. Oh,
Courage.
religion. Like orthodoxy. I've been listening to Paul Vanderklay, and he just has a very expansive view, and he pays attention. He condenses a lot of information from a lot of the liminal web and other spaces. But one thing that I picked up that I hadn't really been aware of, this distinction between Orthodox and like Protestant, the newer, more liberal, more open, and less like embodied, grounded, ritualistic. Like the Orthodox is very much about. It's not so much about propositions and concepts. It's more about doing things and repeating and yeah, just sinking more into being in presence is how I would put it. Which and it's kind of like this resurgence of interest in religion in general, but orthodoxy in particular. There's like this ortho bros concept as young guys are going into orthodox. Anyway, yeah.
I think it's interesting. We have this sort of distinction between religion as maybe a more fixed way of living and thinking, and then a more spiritual, mystical way of a more kind of direct perception of the divine and so on. And I think that unfortunately that's true in our world. I think that that's how it's become. But I think it's worth maybe saying that if you were to have a religious group and the predominantly the leaders in that group were all people who are very spiritual and mystical, then I think the shape and nature of that religion would change in a way that would be very beneficial, right? And it would help other people to sort of cross that lake of fire. And I suspect that most religions in their infancy were more like that, and there was more of a kind of a spark and some essence that could kind of leap from one person to another.
That's my
But I
that's my impression of
sorry, yeah.
Jesus. The story of Jesus, I don't want to interrupt you too much, but my understanding or impression of Jesus now, as I hear more, is like what you just sort of said. Like it's more of a moment there, and that was the magic. But please continue.
Well, I just think there is the potential for religions to become more um, initiatory, perhaps. Like it's not so much the rules and regulations and dogma, but it's more how do you create people that are more that are themselves just more developed beings, so they have higher senses and they're able to directly perceive the divine, right? So that they don't need a rule book. So how do you create more of them?
Right.
And that religion could religions could move more in that direction. It seems like the last, the Abrahamic religions, there's been a tendency to move away from that, but obviously not all. And um, that's the thing. It's a very it's a lot of different. I think that the more orthodox religions, like Eastern Orthodox, tend to be a bit more mystical and so on. So it's not all the same.
Erik.
Yeah, I was kind of I'm gonna make a sort of very similar point to the one Magnus has just made, in that the orthodox versions of pretty much all of the religions pointing at exactly the same thing, and their practices are about surrender, submission, silence, stillness, humbling yourself. They're all essentially the same, um, and so yeah, the dogma and the scriptures and the obedience structures, right? Like and the conforming and the obedience and the mediation of the relationship between human and divine through the institution, like that is the exact opposite of religion, right? Like, this is not reconnecting people to the divine, this is separating them further from the divine. So in many ways, institutional religions should be called anti-religions, because they're doing the exact opposite of what religion is supposed to do.
For some people, I mean, I would only half push back against that and say that I think religion is a tool, and then unfortunately it's become sort of a metastasized tool that itself has become a blocker in exactly the way you described. So, but for some people it's not a blocker. I think for some people it is a tool. I've spent about half a year recently very attracted to Christianity. I kind of ended up bouncing off, but there's a way in which it seemed to have a very real promise to make my life more holy. I'll put it that way.
Well, you can follow the teachings of Jesus without being a Christian. Do you know what I mean? Like, these things. It's very interesting to me. This need people seem to have to label themselves as
mhm.
something, right? Rather than just walking the way. Do you know what I mean? Rather than just being the way themselves, they have to be part of the club. I find that very interesting, that
Well,
phenomenon.
and
Sorry,
sorry,
Magnus.
well, if I could just quickly respond to that,
Yeah,
those
yeah.
those months in which I was very attracted to Christianity is when I was, um, I'm now living near my family, but it was just previous to this point, and I was very lonely and I wanted a community, and so exactly as you say, I wanted to be part of the club, and that was a huge portion of the draw. I felt like a moth attracted to this to a building, and I couldn't get past the window. I couldn't get past the window because I couldn't quite swallow the propositional stuff that I would have to really become a Christian and be accepted in a real way. But the draw was very much the community, at least at my animal monkey level. That was like I wanted to be part of a community. So just
Mhm.
yeah, that's right what you say. Sorry, Magnus, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think there is something, yeah, I guess I found, like, from doing a lot of Buddhist meditation, of hoping to, I guess, um, keep on using this word, level up, but become more conscious, more aware, quickly through doing, I guess, a lot of meditation. Um, it it didn't quite go the way I wanted. However, I just see a lot of wisdom, because I think everyone's different, right? And I think a lot of people, it's very hard to very quickly become very spiritually aware, and it just, some of these things, it takes time, right? There's something about the nature of this earthly life. Things take time to be truly embodied, and to be part of a group, where you just hit the basics with living an ethical life, because that's sort of in the tenets. Having a community of people that support you in doing that, because doing stuff by yourself can, some people it's fine, they just, like, off they go like a bullet, and they're right. But a lot of people it's really hard to keep that motivation there, and having that kind of attractor field of, that you can tune into, can be very helpful, because you almost get a free dose of something higher, because it's sort of,
Yep.
I don't quite know what it is, like whether it's a thought form or something, but just and getting some basics down, whether it's praying, meditating, your diet, some sort of routine. But if all that comes from a religion, you're going to get some fundamental basics. And if you didn't have that, you'd you know you'd be on the streets causing trouble. And just being in that like field for a good chunk of your life, I think it can help you get to the next stage, right? I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, there's some more stuff around the tool notion. As the conversation was going, I was saying like it can be religion can be a tool for self uh, like development or deepening faith, etc. It can also be and has been obviously used as a tool for control, like Catholic Church and things like that. So it 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 can be a tool at various different levels, and they're kind of like going on your own sort of individual path versus being part of a community. There's and like hooligans, not everyone is built to seek the path on their own. So like having the community kind of like drumming it into you, and
Right.
also there to like reinforce certain norms, it can be useful. So there's various ways to approach it, but I definitely like my own experience over the last several years. A lot of conversations about deep topics and including religion and sangha and community and just I'm like curious and interested in understanding and incorporating certain aspects of those things. So far, I haven't decided to join like Jordan Hall joining a Christian community. Um, I don't know. I think everyone's probably familiar with that story, right? Super intellectual, I guess, probably the default sort of atheistic most of his life. Technology and just very, galaxy brain kind of guy. But in all of his explorations, finding his tactic for facing the meta crisis is, faith and community, basically. So that's one path. And I've been finding like it does feel like an iterative thing because there have been times when I feel like, I'm engaging with all these topics and then I feel kind of hypocritical in terms of, not following like I feel like I've onboarded certain fundamental principles and it would be more in line with those principles to live a different way or, make different choices. But it just kind of I keep finding myself deepening more into things. And part of it's just, instead of having this idea, I needed to live a totally different life, it's more like applying those principles more in the life that I already have. So, like how I'm relating to my relatives, and yeah, just things like that.
Mhm. I also find I've onboarded principles from Christianity. Christianity seems to be the one I'm oriented towards. And I've kind of, I also seem to oscillate somehow. And I don't know if this connects, Josh, with your mentioning of iterating. Maybe it does, but um, I'm sort of, as I mentioned, I've bounced off of Christianity, at least in terms of considering becoming a Christian myself, getting baptized and all that. But I guess what you mentioned, faith and community, that's what I want to get to. Um, and I know that if I were to sort of magically snap my fingers and become a Christian, which in some sense feels unavailable to me, and I don't really mean that to say that I want to and I can't, because it's kind of the same thing. I kind of don't want to and I kind of can't, but it's unavailable to me as a move. If I were to, though, I would have faith in community. And yet, where I've ended up now is that, at least for me, the right move is to work on that harder problem of getting it myself. And I'm making some progress. I'm living near my family. That's helped a lot. Um, but yeah, I don't know if I have much more of a point in that, but just faith and community seems to be that's what you want, and then community helps sort of, as Magnus was pointing out, helps. I think it was Magnus helps kind of hold you to certain things. I think Josh, you were kind of making this point too. And it's a lot easier to be a good person around other people. And the other thing about I was coming up as well is in my sort of visitations to church, one thing I really appreciated is that it's a place you can show up and just talk about being a good person. You can behave as a good person without being embarrassed about it, because in the modern world you kind of are almost expected to have this ironic take, this kind of like there's like an edginess which is almost default prescribed, which is really funny. it's kind of ironic that you would have to that you're kind of expected to have a base level of edginess and irony, but you walk into church and you feel the lack of that, or I have felt the lack of that, where like, I can just talk unabashedly about like how I don't know. It's just like we're all presuming that there's a goodness in each other. Not that we're without fault, certainly, but that we're all here to try to be good people. And there's like an earnestness that can come out then because I don't have to carry around like sort of almost a defense that I do in the real world.
It occurred to me, I don't know. I didn't, from your body language, Logan, pick up that you were familiar with the Jordan Hall story necessarily.
Oh
But
yeah.
if you want,
Well, I
you want,
only know the bare bones, actually, really just that it happened.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. Well, given your interest in Christianity, faith and community, I thought he had an interesting conversation with Jim Rett kind of toward the beginning of that. And it's been at least a year since then, but um, it might just be interesting for you to kind of engage with some of what he's talked about from that experience. The other one is what you're describing about church. There's this estuary thing with Paul Vanderklay that's been happening for a while. Some people in the Sunday book club that Erik and I used to be in kind of engaged with that. Well, it seems interesting, and they do some meetings online. That might be another interesting thing for you to kind of dip your toe into and look at, because those kind of conversations where it's about deeper things and people can express whatever. There's a basic format of like people come in. It's kind of like this dialogue is the questions game. What's on people's minds to talk about, and then there's kind of a voting process, and people focus on that. So, and I haven't actually engaged there myself, but it's an interesting thing that I'm continuing to pay attention to.
Yeah. Well, I'll check it out. I'll put it in the show notes too.
Hmm.
So we started out with anxiety, and then we ended up almost like at this moment we're like fully focused on religion, and it's an interesting arc. We went from anxiety, much later we got to courage, and then there seemed to be a connection between courage and faith that, at least to me, feels very strong, and then faith leads to religion. It's just a very kind of interesting arc. And what's also interesting about it is it almost illustrates one of the things we were saying about anxiety, is that it can sort of orient you to a better orientation, And so we started with anxiety. We ended up sort of focusing on, I don't want to say religion because that has some negative connotations, which I think we were implicitly kind of handling. But it led us to questions about faith, trust in the universe, and faith is very much related to this thing that we were talked about sort of earlier than that, which was how do you, this way of being more in the moment, responding to the moment, and sort of here we are, let's respond to this, as opposed to having a list of anxieties to go through. Yeah, Magnus?
Yeah, I just think that anxiety is a form of suffering. It's not nice. It's unpleasant, and if it's there in the background a lot of the time, that it prompts a kind of awakening, right? You want to grow beyond that experience of anxiety, and you're very motivated to do that, and you kind of live with it. And it's not like your ego solves the problem, but there's something within you that maybe grows, and you become more awake to the situation and ways of being in the world where you're less anxious. And I think it's that awakening aspect that can move you in a direction more towards the divine, or the religion, spiritual, in that general direction. So it does make sense, I think, that the trajectory of our discussion.
Yeah, I think what you say is true of suffering in general, not just of anxiety, but of suffering in general. I think it's Bernardo Kastrup, I think it is. He talks really beautifully about this, that suffering is actually a key tool of nature, because it is only when we suffer that we really start to question and examine and look at things. If everything's fine, why? Did you know what I mean? If everything's fine, nothing's bothering you, then you don't look at anything. And so What we don't need to do is pile on with all the extra suffering of, oh, it's not fair, this shouldn't be happening. All of that kind of stuff is unnecessary suffering. But, the natural challenges and difficulties that come along in life are there for a reason. And yeah, as I say, suffering is a key tool of nature in order to foment insight and innovation, and it works across all levels of evolution.
Yeah, there's a similar argument to be made that it's something. I think the argument that's coming to mind is something like when we're uncertain is when we are conscious. Like consciousness is actually
Yeah,
related to uncertainty
yeah,
and
yeah,
unpredictability, and that sort of very much rhymes with what you just said, where it seems like I would almost say suffering is you could say suffering brings consciousness, and there's almost like a word play there where it kind of starts leaning back into what I think Magnus was saying, where suffering leads to enlightenment, like higher
yeah,
consciousness. And this is
yeah.
also a point that I've been hearing lately where people that have suffered deeply, well, I certainly don't want to say that they all, I think John Vervaeke says something like, you know, uh, it's better to fall in love with someone who's suffered and grieved deeply because there's a depth to them that people who haven't like suffered the death of a loved one, they just don't have that depth.
Yeah. There's
That
a saying in. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Josh.
just that old phrase, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, came up because it was like, if the challenge is too much, then it can break you, or but if to the extent that we have enough resilience to meet whatever the challenge is, it's a growth can happen. And I think the lead singer of Tool, and I'm not 100% sure, but one of their songs talks about, and he does it both from the first person as the child being raped. One of the lines is like, "My throat's wide open." It's a very catchy song. That's the thing. Like it draws you in with the music, but then the subject matter is very. Anyway, it seems to me that some of the depth of his ability to express and just it is partly because of having endured that experience, and he has sympathy for the abuser because he's like part of the song. He's from the perspective of the abuser, and it's like he's come full circle because this happened to him. Um, anyway, just
Yeah,
around like
yeah.
resilience and challenge. Yeah.
When I'm suffering deeply, it has become, and this almost touches on faith, a comforting thing when I'm suffering deeply, like especially when my plans are falling apart. I really don't know what I'm doing with my life. I'm almost ashamed of how little of my plans are working out. I don't really know what's going on. The deeper the confusion and suffering, at least I know, and it seems like I really believe this, like as a principle of reality almost, um, that the more confused and nonsensical and painful everything is at the moment, and the longer it lasts, like the greater the gold is at the end, and I will come out the other side, um, with real gold there, and that just seems to always be true, and it's very comforting too, in those times. It makes it allows me grace, which is another sort of religious term. This you could say faith allows me grace. That would be a very short way of kind of saying all that. Well, we're about at the few minutes from the hour. I don't know if we had any closing thoughts or.
I would like to say that the fact that we've been recording this has provoked a certain amount of anxiety for me, and it's really clarified. It's really like focused my mind. I've been
Hmm.
I've really enjoyed this. I have got a little bit more into a flow state than perhaps I would have done otherwise.
Yeah, it's funny how recording changes things. I feel more
That's funny.
more
For me, it doesn't at all. Not. Yeah.
there's a sense of being a
Are you
little more on edge, but not necessarily in a bad way, but just like on the edge. I think I'm somewhere between Erik and Magnus.
Yeah. Well, the thing about like doing something repeatedly, because Erik just, he does a lot of the recorded conversations, and it just, yeah, and non-recorded. Um, I think less so for Magnus. And Magnus has this, one thing, Magnus, you were saying, and the way that I would frame it is there's an opportunity for growth, an evolution past like the devils we know. Like if we're accustomed to a certain level of anxiety, that's the devil, that's familiar, right? So if it suddenly goes away for some reason, like it just like how do I get back to the normal
Got
state?
nothing to hold on to.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But there is, through whatever wisdom, engagement with, or going through rituals, whatever, there's various different approaches, but there's an opportunity for growth if we're able to realize that there is this familiar thing that's not useful for us anymore, and being able to, work with it and integrate, or however you want to put it, but it releases that disturbed energy, and we can just kind of drop into what we're actually experiencing. So that was just a clarification that came up. I think I'll leave it there. The idea of talking about our relationship to anxiety was attractive, but it feels like, given the time, maybe we'll save it for another time, or just contemplate it on our own.
We got about, let's see, 5 minutes left until our official end. But maybe we can call it there. Cool. Alrighty. Well, thanks everyone. Say goodbye to all of the hypothetical viewers that don't really exist yet. But
All the millions of YouTube viewers.
yeah, that's right.
It's gonna go so viral.
I know. It's gonna go viral.
These subjects are so clickbaity.
Yeah, that's right. Just before the call, I was here like 5 minutes or 10 minutes early. I asked Grok, like, what are some good marketing things? And it was like, oh, you could clip it. And that's like, at first I was like, oh, that's a good idea. I'm like, wait, what am I going to clip from this? Because it's all so continuous. It's almost the perfectly wrong media to clip. It's like I just would clip the whole thing somehow.
Sometimes, like this reminds me of this. There's this Ecofo thing where that, like, a seed from a longer conversation is part of there's this soft, anyway, it's a whole platform, and it's basically like Zoom, but then you can go back afterwards and clip out parts and share them with your community.
Oh, interesting. I might have to check that out.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, regardless of views or not, just good to see you all and be in dialogue once again.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I liked how it's been spun up. Definitely some signature.
Yeah, it was fun. We slipped right into the rhythm, no problem, didn't we? Yeah.
Yep. Cool. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Sam, see ya.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Bye.